Hello, Jay, and hello, world. This week I want to talk about tribal society, which I see as kind of on the opposite end of the continuum of where we are right now. While right now we have little intrinsic motivations to be good to one another in society and lots of extrinsic motivations. Back in tribal society, it was the opposite situation, where there was no government, of course, and so there was no extrinsic motivations. The only thing that really held society together was people being good to one another, so intrinsic motivations. I figured if we're going to try to figure out how to fix our current situation by sort of recreating those intrinsic motivations, the best place to start is to understand what it looked like when it did work. So why did it work? The short answer seems to be things were simpler when it was smaller. The human brain seems to have a sort of fundamental limit on the number of relationships it can make. This is often called Dunbar's number, and it's thought to be around 150 people. So while the group is within sort of this range, it's possible for the group to be entirely held together by the fact that everyone knows one another. At its foundation, it worked because our brains were evolved for that, and that means that our wiring sort of was an extrinsic motivation for us. So before society, maybe even before language, human relationships were only something that could happen in person. And so for that reason, our brain evolved to only ever release oxytocin, which is kind of like the social bonding and also kind of the love hormone when we are around other people. Which makes sense because that was just always the case. An unusual finding a lot of studies have found recently with this is that a way to help people sort of just bond together, despite sort of like maybe different ideological views, is just simply to have them spend more time together. Just being in their presence, regardless of talking, regardless of agreeing, it's just sort of time with people. So given all this, it kind of makes sense that the brain didn't try to make connections with more than 150 people because there's kind of only so many people you can actually like spend time with in a day. The second component I wanted to talk about is actually go back to what we were talking about last week, which is about being in an environment that just encourages people to be morally good to one another. So when you're in groups when everyone knows each other, it is beneficial to be kind because everyone remembers, and so it is very likely that when you're in need, someone will reciprocate. Likewise, when you do something that is unkind, it is very likely that everyone will remember and you will have to face the repercussions. Even if we could all just rely on trusting the people that we trust, the reality is that groups actually struggle to make collective decisions once people don't all know each other. Each person's perspective is unique, and so it takes time to get to know them if you want to actually understand their perspective. Helping a group then come to a difficult decision then requires navigating all of these different perspectives and the stakes and values that each person has, which you kind of can't really do unless you understand that person, which again is limited by this sort of 150 person limit. So like everyone could mean well and yet still end up with bad decisions just because no individual person can ever confirm that it's a good decision. So even despite our wiring and what it is kind of it makes sense for us to think, society was still sort of just like limited at this upper bound by our ability to collectively make decisions. So once society found itself sort of just growing beyond this limit, humans found ways to adapt. The first was social hierarchies, which provided a way for everyone's opinions to be kind of considered, accounted for, and also just for people sort of being trustworthy. Just like everyone can be accounted for as long as there is somebody who is kind of keeping track of a number of people that they themselves can keep track of. And then many other things that we associate with society then sort of pretty quickly arose, such as customs, which sort of allowed people to think in more similar ways and to just reduce the amount of disagreement and chaos that you get when just the number of people increases. Laws were created to address sort of conflicts that would sort of naturally arise during decision-making processes, and some maybe even encouraged this behavior. So it's possible that very early on there were these extrinsic motivations to do good, but at the very least there were extrinsic motivations to not do bad things. We also think religions arose very early on, and that these served as a way to help align the group's values and beliefs, which, if not aligned, make it very difficult for people to actually come to a consensus. So people can all trust each other and they can all be willing to put themselves aside for other people. But if the group does not share a set of values, it can run into many decisions where it just ultimately cannot come to an amicable agreement. But as you can imagine, these solutions were imperfect. Laws sort of by their nature were sort of simplistic and rigid, which ultimately meant that the grays of people's lives and of morality, which could never really be properly captured. And then customs, while sort of helping align the group, also resulted in sort of worldviews that it caused entrenchment, that kind of sort of prevented diversity of thought, which we know is so important. And having seen all the problems of like capitalism, why not go back to that now? So transitioning from tribal life to a sort of more modern society created all these problems and imperfect solutions. Why did people all over the world choose to do that, completely independently of each other? And at least just for thought, why not try that again now? That's what I want to talk about next week. Thank you for doing this with me, Jay. See you next week.